The September 11th Memorial Museum opens to the public this week in Lower Manhattan, and some conspiracy theorists, who are apparently no strangers to Photoshop, plan on attending. According to the Village Voice newspaper, which broke the story, the conspiracy group Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth plan on standing outside the entrance on opening day to hand out fake museum brochures designed to look exactly like the real ones. Take a look. On the left side of your screen, the real deal. Welcome to the 9/11 Memorial Preview, Visitor's Guide for Adults. On the right, the group's handiwork. Welcome to the other story about 9/11. That's, of course, the false one. Inside, they claim they've compiled, quote, a vast amount of evidence, I'm using the term loosely there, proving, that's their word, not ours, that all three World Trade Center skyscrapers were deliberately destroyed by explosives on 9/11. Of course, they don't actually prove anything except for man's capacity for believing crazy things and man's insensitivity to, for instance, the families of the approximately 3,000 people killed in New York, the Pentagon, and in a field in Pennsylvania by Islamic terrorists with al-Qaeda, as every credible investigation has actually proven. Let's bring in Emily Bazelon, senior editor at Slate, for more on this. Emily, we are more than a decade after the tragedy of 9/11. Why do these truthers have such staying power?
It's such a good question, the persistence of this theory. You know, usually with a conspiracy theory, you imagine that people are trying to make sense of the senseless. But with 9/11, we have a real conspiracy called al-Qaeda. And so one has to imagine that the anti-government motivation of the 9/11 truthers is really what's driving this. Because if you could imagine that the government made up 9/11 as a hoax, then the government is completely monstrous. There's no reason to believe anything any federal official says, and certainly no reason to pay your taxes.
And what happens when this kind of nonsense hits the echo chamber of the internet?
Well, it tends to multiply online, and you see these dark corners of the internet where people pile on, and there's this very minute parsing of the technicalities of the supposed evidence, and more detail gets added and accumulated, and it kind of feeds on itself.
And the idea here, right, is not just that the three buildings were destroyed by explosives, that it's all part of this grand conspiracy where the U.S. government, I mean, let me state, if I haven't made it clear enough, none of this is true. This is all just crazy talk, but that the U.S. government faked it, killed all these people intentionally, and it was just to start a war in Iraq and another one in Afghanistan. Is that the idea that they're going for here?
That's the idea, and just to state it is to show how horrifying it is. I suppose that given that the American government did put forward some false ideas to motivate going into Iraq, in particular the whole idea that there were weapons of mass destruction there, that's like the tiny, tiny kernel of truth that is in some way related to this completely crazy theory.
And there's also a lot of scapegoating involved in the 9/11 truther stuff. There's anti-Semitism, anti-Israel, anti-corporations, right?
Exactly. And I think you see these virulent strains that are related to each other and familiar from fringe right-wing talk. And they all get kind of weirdly braided together in this particular theory. And
historically, we see that these conspiracies come after very upsetting events. The Kennedy assassination, the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. Is there a pattern there?
I think that each time something really scary and disastrous happens, people search for meaning. And then sometimes, even when there is a clear explanation, because we have that for 9/11 in a way that we didn't for the Kennedy assassination, certainly at first, then you have this search for supposed other evidence out there, and people just kind of pick it up and run with it, even when it seems completely unwarranted.